Hey guys, welcome back to the Spruce and Linen channel. I'm Janelle and today we're going to make this woven wall hanging. So we are combining plaid with diamond twill and we are hanging it in a whole new way. So let's get started. This video is brought to you by the Spruce and Linen shop where you can find weaving looms, kits, tools, and supplies. Link in the description box below. The first thing we're going to talk about is the pattern because looking at this, it's going to be a little bit different from the other twill patterns that I have created for you, but it's still super easy. So basically what we're looking at here is we're going to have our yarn as our warp. So we have sections of white, black, white, black, white. And we have the same exact thing going on with the weft. So there are, for each section, there's 9 warp strings and 9 weft strings. And how you're gonna read this is pretty simple. So for instance, when you're on this part of the pattern, you're weaving with your darker color, and that's where the pattern is going to get created. So in this section, all your darker blocks represent over a warp string and all the lighter ones represent going under a warp string. These sections are all tabby, and I even made lines here on the edges so that you can know that you have to go over this one so you'd be under the next one. So this is just tabby or plain weave, and then all the way across doing the same thing. Then when you get to the next section, you're doing tabby with your lighter color, and when you get to the pattern section, the dark blocks represent under and the lighter blocks represent over. So that's the only difference, is you are switching back and forth because we're working in different sections of color. So the other thing we need to talk about is how we're going to hang this. So I'm going to be using a dowel at the top and the bottom. So this is a fringeless piece, and I thought it would be really fun to try this because I know sometimes you just want to switch it up. Sometimes you don't feel like cutting fringe, which I totally understand. And I thought this would be a really fun one. So I chose 1 1/4 inch dowels here, and I cut them at 10.5 inches wide. I will be weaving on this Becca loom, and it is 5 ends per inch. And if you're using my Spruce and Linen loom, that's a 4 ends per inch. So you'll want your dowels to be a little bit longer because your piece is going to be wider. What we need to figure out now is because we're going to hang this directly from our loops, we need to figure out how much space we need to account for that. So basically all you're going to do is you can just take a scrap piece of string, you can wrap it around your dowel and sort of pinch it, make sure you have a little bit of give, and you can slide it off your dowel and just simply measure from your fingertips to the end of the loop, which for me is it's about 2 inches. So I need at least 2 inches to fit my dowels here. My piece is going to end up at 7 inches long, again, 5 ends per inch. And my loom is about 12 inches from notch to notch. So that means I'll have 5 inches to play with. And so I need to make sure I'm starting my weaving 2.5 inches from the bottom of my loom and trying to end at 2.5 inches from the top. Now I am going to be accounting for some twining at the top and the bottom, so we'll add another about 1/2 inch to that. So now I'm at 4.5 inches. So that means I'm going to start my twining at 2.25 inches from the bottom. So hopefully that makes sense. Basically, again, you're just trying to center the piece on your loom. So now we'll get started with the warping. And just like our other plaid tutorial, we are using our warp and weft as the same yarn. And I'm just using Loops and Threads Cozy Wool in black and in, I think this color is called Fleece. And they're just a nice bulky yarn. So my pattern here is 45 warp strings wide. So I'm going to find center, which I already have marked on my loom, and then count out 22 from there and start on that one. Now the other thing that's going to be different on this one versus the last plaid one we did is you're actually, excuse my loom, this loom is a friction fit, and so while you're warping, way over on this side, it can be a little bit wonky. So different from the other plaid tutorial I did with you guys, we are actually going to be warping in sections and cutting off each end in each section. So for this first group of 9, I am going to cut off this end, leave yourself a nice long tail because we're gonna have to tie this in the back later. Just make sure that your knot isn't insanely tight so that you can undo it later. And again, you are just gonna leave that tail, so just tuck them out of the way. And then you can start on your next section, which is going to be our black. So I'm going to continue warping and then we'll get started with the weaving. So now I'm done with the warping and we're ready to get started with the weaving. So the first thing we're going to do, like I mentioned, is start off with a twining stitch, and we're going to do that at the top and the bottom. So you can choose either the light or the dark yarn that you're using for this as your twining. I'm going to go with the black. So I'm just going to give you a really quick refresh on the twining stitch, but I will stick a link up here, somewhere up here, for you if you want the full twining tutorial, because there are a couple different ways to do it. I like to do it the way that I use tapestry needles, and so we'll quickly go over that. So the first thing we're going to do is we're actually going to have 2 different strings here. One thing to note, I usually like to use a piece of cardboard at the bottom of my weavings, but I am just going to do a twining stitch. Make sure it's sitting exactly where I want and just have that as the base. So you can do that. You can cut a piece of cardstock or cardboard for the bottom if you want, but it's totally up to you. So for twining stitch, the first thing we're gonna do is a row of plain weave. Leave yourself a nice tail on one end, and then you're going to go in with your other string here. And basically all we're going to do is anywhere the string is going over a warp string, we're gonna go under and through like so, and that is the base of your twining stitch. So I'm going to start just going under here. And then on the next one, so I'm skipping this string, we're going over it. We're going under, down, and through. And then we're kind of pulling it tight. Now you don't want the strings to suck in. You simply want them to just spread out your warp evenly. And again, so we're skipping the next string and then we're going down, under, and through. And then pulling everything tight. I'll show you one more time and then we will finish this up. So again, the weft string, so this previous weft string, where it is going over a warp string, you're going to go under and through like this. And then tighten it all up. So you can continue that process all the way across. And that's looking pretty good there. So now all I'm going to do is one more row of twining, and I'm going back to that first string. I'm going to do plain weave and then do the twining over that again. So I'm just doing one more quick check that everything is nice and straight before I get started. And that's the beauty of a twining stitch, is it does hold really well, and it's a very structural stitch, so it's not going to slide around on you too much. But I do want to make sure that it is as straight as it can be before I get started with weaving. So we're going to get started with weaving the pattern in now, and we're starting with our dark color first, so that you can see here the darker color is creating the shape. So I'm just going to measure this out. There's 9 rows in each section, so I need a piece that's at least 9 rows long. So we're going to get our second piece of paper here so that we can focus on the first row. And remembering that we're going in with the dark color, so our dark blocks in the pattern sections represent an over a warp string. So it's over 1, under 3, over 1, under 3, over 1, and then plain weave. So we're over this one, so we're just going under, over, under, over, under, over, under, over, under, and then doing that same thing again. So over 1, under 3, over 1, under 3, over 1. I'm just gonna pull this through. So we're over this one, and then plain weave. And then the same thing here, over 1, under 3, over 1, under 3, over 1. So that is our first row. So now we can push this up and work on the next row. And we're starting with under 3, over 3, under 3. Then we're here with our black and black section is tabby. So we're going under and over, opposite of the row previous. Then we're going under 3, over 3, under 3. Plain weave. And then under 3, over 3, under 3. Scooching up to the third row, we are going to go over 1, under 1, over 2, under 1, over 2, under 1, over 1, and plain weave. So same thing again. Over 1, under 1, over 2, under 1, over 2, under 1, over 1, and plain weave. And then the same thing at that last white block. Scooch that up. Now we're on row 4. And again, we're just continuing on following that. On this row, the dark blocks are over, light under, and all the rest plain weave. So under 1, over 2, under 1, over 1, under 1, over 2, under 1, plain weave, and then the same thing for the next 2 sections. Now, something to consider when you're working on a plaid is that we do want the same amount of warp strings as weft strings, and we want it to be square. So I'm just gonna do a quick measurement here. Now we are 4 strings in, so I'm gonna measure what is 4 strings on my warp. So 4 strings is about 3/4 of an inch. So I'm gonna go ahead and measure this, and I'm pretty close there. I might be beating down a little bit hard. And we want those 4 strings to only be about 1/4 inch, or sorry, 3/4 of an inch. And that's looking pretty good there. So just keep checking back in with that, because again, we do want these blocks to be nice and square. So now we're scooching up to row 5, and we're doing over 2, under 1, over 3, under 1, over 2, and then our tabby. And then same thing for the next 2 sections. All right, so now we're scooching back up, and we're just going to continue on until we get to the next section. So now we can move on to our next section, which is going in with the white yarn. So I'm gonna leave myself a nice tail on this side, and we're going to switch to the white yarn. And the concept is exactly the same, but we'll go over it really quickly here. So we're going to start by going under. So you can see that we were over on this very last row, so we're going to go under. We're going to do our plain weave in this first section. And now we're at this section. So you might want to lift this up all the way just for this first row. So we have our over. So now our light blocks represent over in the pattern sections. So we're going over 1, under 3, over 1, under 3, over 1. And then everything else, just like this last section, is going to be the same. So I'm going to continue on, and then we'll meet back when it's finished. So now that I have 4 rows on here, I'm going to do this same twining stitch that we did at the bottom here at the top. So now I've finished all of the weaving portion, so I am going to flip this around and tuck in all these ends. Make sure you don't accidentally tuck in any of these, just all your side strings. All right, so one thing I didn't account for was the fact that all my ends were going to be sitting right behind these bars. So I'm gonna just try to take this loom apart and get this weaving off, and then I'll tuck in the ends after. Oh no. Alright, guys, I messed up. This is going to be interesting. So this is the front of my piece, and I started tucking in my ends in the front. So I'm gonna have to be very careful and get these strings actually off to the back. And I'm gonna have to go find any other strings I tucked in. That might have been the only ones. So make sure you're actually working on the back and learn from my mistakes. Now that all the ends are tucked in, the next thing that we're going to need to do is we're going to need to undo any of these knots from where we were tying it onto our loom, because these do still need to wrap around our dowel. Okay, so now all of those knots are undone, so I can pull out my dowels again, and we're going to start sliding this on. So the one nice thing about using this kind of yarn for your warp is that it is stretchy, so it's actually going to be able to stretch over this dowel. And then all these loose ends, you can kind of just let them fall forward, and we'll tie them around the back after. And I'm just going to start slipping all my loops onto the dowel. So the next thing I'm doing is just spreading this out evenly onto the dowel. Oh, and I missed a loop here, so I'm gonna actually have to go backwards, slip those off, and make sure I get all those loops in. Now, before I tie these loops around the back, I am going to slip this onto the dowel, onto the other dowel, because I just want to make sure that when I do tie these, I'm not pulling them up from the bottom. So we're gonna just continue that same process onto the other dowel. Okay, so now we're going to just go ahead and flip this over and work on all these extra ends that we have. Just gonna make sure all these loops are sitting properly. And basically all we're gonna do is you're just going to tie it around one of the other loops. So here's this loop here, and I'm just gonna tie it around the one beside it and tie a knot. And then as you can see on the front, it just looks like it's part of all the other loops. So we're just going to cut off the little tails and just leave yourself a little bit so it doesn't come undone. And you can do that with all of these extra loops. So now the very last thing we need to do is tie a hanging string onto the dowel. All right, you guys, so here's the finished piece. And as you can see, you could really hang a weaving, any kind of weaving this way, not just this particular pattern. You could even do it if you were working with regular warp string, but one thing to keep in mind when you are working with a less stretchy warp string is that you'll want to give yourself more room at the top and bottom to slip these on. Like I did for some of these, have to stretch them on. So if you're using a non-stretchy warp string, that's gonna be a little more challenging. So just give yourself a little bit more room. All right, you guys, so I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. I'm loving this way of hanging a weaving. I love that it's different, no fringe to cut, so that's a bonus. And I can't wait to see you guys try this out. So make sure you tag me on Instagram at Spruce and Linen, and you can also use hashtag SL Weaving Club to show me your work so I can see it and share it. If you like this video, please hit that like button, subscribe, and click the bell to get notifications when I post new videos. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.